Welcome back, and today we're talking about rhythm and contrast. Stay tuned.
The first rule of Incite Club is you don't talk about Incite Club. You do Incite Club. The second rule of Incite Club is the only assumptions we make about one another are that we all want happiness and we all want to avoid suffering. The third rule of Incite Club is you check all your other assumptions at the door. We hope these conversations will bring you insights that incite you to action. Welcome to Incite Club.
How appropriate, being that we are in exact opposite seasons right now, and I'm all rolled up here, and yeah, and I'm in triple digits. It's been over 100 degrees. It's so hot, it's miserable. Yeah, we were trying to do weather exchange before we started recording, but yes, perfect way to think about contrast. I was listening to my liked songs on Spotify the other day, and our song, Your Own Myth, came on, which is always such a thrill to me. It's a good reminder. Oh yeah, I am a creator. And it gets to the bridge. And I'm always just listening to myself, not with self-judgment, but I'm always just listening there and going like, I'm scrambling to try to catch the rhythm. You know, I had this vision for, I have a fantasy of being a being a rapper. That's my alter ego. And so for that bridge, I had this vision of I really wanted to have this rapid fire flow of, all about frustration. And I'm barely getting the rhythm. It's so many words and it's so fast paced. But I'm not riding the horse and leading it. I'm like fallen off the back and I'm holding onto the reins and being dragged behind it. And that's okay. I remember recording it, and it was the very first song I ever recorded, and there were so many things to learn and there were so many challenges. And so just to get through however many takes it was to cobble together that bridge, I feel really proud. I'm really happy with it. And also it's just interesting as a way of thinking literally about rhythms. We were talking about rhythms in life, but thinking with literal music rhythms, sometimes we're not in the pocket. Yeah. That's the perfect analogy. Like, it's the same thing with life, right? When we feel like we are barely following things and like just getting by, it's usually because we're not in the pocket of the rhythm that is in there. Or sometimes we're fighting the rhythm, even like we are in one cycle and we wish we were in another, and then things get more complicated than they have to be. Just like talking about seasons, right? If I wanted to wear a tank top in the winter, or if you wanted to wear a big coat in triple digits. Yeah.
When I was a kid, we had a trampoline in the backyard. And if multiple people are jumping on it, the surface of the trampoline is creating waves, right? And so there's a depression and there's a trough and a peak. And if multiple people are jumping, you can get in a situation where you're creating conflicting waves. And if you insist on keeping with your own rhythm, it feels really jarring. If you get into rhythm with the other person, then your trough is reinforced by their peak. Like there's this synchronicity, or no, that's not the word I want. Symbiosis. And I know I have had this experience literally with rhythms. Like sometimes doing Kundalini yoga, there will be a Kriya. It often happens, Kriyas were like spinning your arms like this or doing a kind of circle, and I'll feel out of rhythm and I feel out of control. And then when I get back into the rhythm of the music and the rhythm of just the movement of my arms, there's so much ease. but over the course of 11 minutes, sometimes I'll go in and out of, I'll feel like I'm fighting the wave formation or I'm in the wave formation. And that feeling of trying really hard and it still feels like life is working against me becomes a very palpable lesson in those moments.
Mm.
Have you experienced that with like, I sometimes even like knock my fists together doing this one and I get really frustrated and angry.
Yeah, well, I have different. You probably have the same thing. I have different experiences with rhythm in kriyas and movement like that. There are moments where yes, I'm fighting the movement and it's just hard to stay in it. But also there's the same thing that you mentioned with the trampoline. Sometimes you get in the pocket and the movement that maybe one day that I did it was hard and I was like pushing through, and in another it gets in the flow and it feels like the movement is helping itself, like
Yes. The
yeah.
movement's moving me. This
The
happens to me
movement,
all
yes,
the time in cat cow. Like I can feel the difference between I'm doing it and I'm really trying versus oh, I caught the wave and the movement
yes,
is moving me somehow.
yes, yes. And it's so interesting because sometimes it's the same career.
Oh, yeah, yeah.
Yeah. Nothing changed except the maybe the mindset that we were in doing it, like we are in like flow instead of fighting the movement. And it's the same thing. It's not, of course there is evolution as well, like when we start something and like a month, 2 months, 3 months into it. But there's also that happens sometimes from one day to the other.
Yeah.
Then what
Happens
changed?
sometimes it happens to me one moment to the next.
Yeah.
For me, I think it has a lot to do with the energy of try. I'm really
Yeah.
trying. Like the harder I try to catch the rhythm, the harder it becomes versus allow or surrender or flow, as you said. But there's also something there around listening versus imposing,
Mm.
right? So as long as I'm like, this is the rhythm, this is the rhythm, this is the rhythm, I'm going to be in contrast with it. And I've never been able to do this in my life, but I have the image in my head of people who play double Dutch jump rope, which is where you have the two jump ropes, and so one jump rope, you have two people holding it, and you just jump over it, right? Fine. But when you've got two, then in order to jump over one, you have to duck onto the other. I've never done it, but I've seen people do
Yeah.
it. And the real pro move is instead of starting static where the jump ropes are under you and people begin turning them, they're already turning the ropes and you jump in. So you got to find exactly that right rhythm, or swinging on a swing and then you jump off at the height of the arc. Like these moments where you intuitively know where you are in the rhythm, where you are in the cycle, and you can come in smoothly, you can exit smoothly, you can flow with it. I'm fascinated by people's ability to do that, and I feel like it's something I've never really gotten, but it's about listening or watching, sensing what that rhythm actually is rather than enforcing your own, like, this is where we are in the pattern. I'm gonna make it, like you were saying about trying to wear a tank top.
Yeah. Yeah, and we were talking about before we got into the podcast, we were talking about both our natural cycles and also um, we mentioned grief, which is a totally different cycle, right? And I guess that's where we get into rhythms that are expected, like the period, for example. We know we're gonna have one week that's going to be one way, and more like uh, with a lot of energy, another that it's more like angry, another that is slowing down, and so on. So we know that we have uh, this amount of time for each part of the cycle, and we can choose to fight it, but there's no point in into doing that either. But then comes a cycle like a rhythm like grief that can catch you like by surprise at any time. Like
Yeah.
even when something already happened and you feel like, okay, I'm going through, it might be something that happens that we remember, or that comes that feeling of missing, or even in moments where we would think like, oh, everything is going well now in my life, I'm happy and so on, we can get caught up with the thought of, but I wish I could share this with the person that was here like a while ago.
Yeah. And it's so scary not to know what the cycle is of the rhythm you're in, and or to even be able to recognize it. Just recognizing that grief is a cycle is already so much more empowering than, oh, it should be a straight line. Anytime we think something should be linear and it's actually a cyclical rhythm, we really screw ourselves up, because we go, I should be over this. I thought I came through this already. I thought that already passed. I thought I overcame that. And you did. It's just, this is the next wave of it, the next iteration. So I think already what you're saying is so powerful, that grief is a rhythm. So we can expect things to come back. We can expect there to be another wave. Okay. Oh, all right. So that's the first, like, there's not something wrong with me. I'm not doing it incorrectly. And then there's the discomfort of, but I don't know what, with our cycles, we tend to know, I really know, like, okay, it's day 14. I'm gonna get a little spicy. But when we don't know what the length of the rhythm is, man, that's disorienting and disheartening.
And cycles can overlap, just like the trampoline analogy that you mentioned. Sometimes we might have a cycle of grief that's going with the period cycle, and with the seasons, which is another cycle. And then we start piling these waves that sometimes conflict and sometimes don't. And we might feel like pushing and pulling at the same time.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, or like waves reinforcing each other, right? It's
Yeah.
winter and it's dark, and I'm getting a grief wave, and I'm at this place in my cycle, and it's this place in my moon map, and it's like all the things compounding. That's really helpful to be aware of, because ultimately, I think there's this. Every time the intro plays, something different strikes me, and this time, it was like the assumptions we make are that everyone wants to avoid suffering, right? And I think one of the key ways we suffer is by feeling we don't know who we are, or we're not being who we think we are. So if you're in a place where all those waves are compounding, or just some waves are compounding, or just there's a big wave of something like grief, or I was talking about lack of focus, in my
Yeah.
monthly cycle, those days where I'm like, I can't have a coherent thought, it creates suffering in me, because I feel like I am not who I think I am.
Mm.
Do you relate to that at all with grief?
Yes. Yes. Um, I'm not even thinking of grief specifically for that, but yeah, moments where uh, for some reason I don't feel like myself, uh, either because I'm not having a good day, or I overreacted with something, or I haven't took the time to give myself the energy that I need to be able to do everything that I want to do in the day,
Mm.
yeah, for sure. If I fall off the agreements that I have with myself, I definitely feel like I'm not like honoring myself enough to feel like myself. And yet, I feel like these are such powerful moments for us to learn how to give ourselves some grace as well. Because, especially being like a recovering perfectionist and a Virgo, I feel like uh, it's so easy to just want to do everything right, because if you do everything right, there's nothing that you really need to deal with. There's no consequences to deal with. And yet, it's in the moment where we do something wrong, or that we don't uh, follow through with everything that we wish we wanted to do or that we expected to do, and so on, that we see our humanness and we get to have more compassion towards ourselves and others as well.
Mm. So what do you think are the underlying assumptions that make it so uncomfortable to go to the through these, firstly, just different parts in the rhythm, different parts in the cycle, and then rhythms where we're having a hard time. The song starts playing and we're trying to clap along. We're like, where's the beat? Where I can't find it. Um, what do you think are the underlying assumptions we have that make these rhythmic changes so uncomfortable?
Hmm. Expectations is one of the big things, especially if we're going to talk about music. Even with the your own myth, right? We have the rhythm is the same, basically, but we have a pocket that is more fluid in the beginning, and then there's the rap, like you mentioned, a little bit further in the song. And what happens is the underlying rhythm is still the same. The velocity of the song doesn't change. It's still the same BPM. Yet we're basically changing the rhythm where we are of what we're singing, right? So there's no right or wrong in there because both fit the pocket.
Yeah.
Yet we have our own rhythm, and sometimes we are able to navigate it in double time, for example.
Yeah.
And sometimes we need to go like half time to move with it. Uh, and it might be still we're still the same, like we have the same rhythm. We're still the same
Same
person.
time signature, yeah, but it's would it be the tempo that's shifting?
The
Is that
tempo.
okay?
Yeah, basically that's what I mean. Like the tempo is not shifting per
Okay.
se. It's still the same tempo, but you can be let's say at tempo of 70 and sing at 140,
Okay, yeah.
because if we overlap is just double the
Yeah,
time,
yeah,
and we could be singing at 35
that makes sense.
and still fits, right? It's when we are trying to get to that 140 but we're actually at 120, 130, that creates those disjointed ripples.
Yeah, so close, and then maybe that's time to, like, fall back to, yeah,
Yeah.
the 70. Yeah. Um, yeah, you mentioned expectation, so expecting that things will remain the same, expecting that things will be linear, expecting that once I go through it once, I don't have to repeat it, expecting I can always set the rhythm, expecting I'm in charge. And even assuming that, I don't know, but putting a value judgment on different speeds, on different rhythms, I think is something we do. Because I definitely have a value judgment on being more productive from the mind, I'll say.
Yeah.
So on days where I'm able to accomplish more mental tasks, I'm able to do more writing or serve more clients or come up with more ideas or solve more problems using my mind. I tend to count those days as like, yes, I was a good person on those days. I was a good Megan.
Good Megan.
Right. So it's, one of the assumptions there is a value judgment on which rhythms are desirable and which ones aren't. And certainly in my culture, certainly in my country, there's a lot of value judgment placed on having a lot of output, like that kind of productivity, output, speed, moving from one task to the next. And there's a lot of devaluation of deep time for feeling, integration, allowing.
And even like excess of I don't want to, the word is not judgment of it, it's I'm missing the word, but basically ex- it is an expectation, but like we are taxing ourselves sometimes on having the same level of results and energy every day, instead
Yeah.
of remembering that yes, there are rhythms, and sometimes we accomplish like double time, like we're saying, like we accomplish the double what we usually do in one day, and we don't give ourselves the celebration for that. It's just like, oh yeah, great, you did what you had to do. But we do judge ourselves when we do half of what we expected to do. What if we put this like on like summing everything and seeing how much it would be per day? Would
Yeah.
it be good enough, or like uh maybe even better than good enough? Because
Yeah.
some,
What if we got the average?
the average, yeah. Because when we when we look at things closely, like day by day, we don't have the real bird's eye view of everything that we accomplished in a year, for example.
Yeah. Yeah. I have this game I like to play called Snapshot,
Mm.
where I just pause and take a snapshot of my life. I did this morning. For so long, I really wanted to have a garden. I wanted to be growing things. And, I have this image of being out in the garden, drinking my coffee or tea in the morning, and, as like this really full life. And it's so easy to just rush by things. And then this morning, uh, it occurred to me, okay, I should water the garden because it's going to be another really hot day. And I had just poured a cup of coffee and I was like, I'm going to go water my garden, like drinking my coffee. I'm going to go create this fantasy moment. And I even said that to Grady. I was like, I'm going to go live my fantasy of having my coffee in the garden. And so this idea of snapshot, take a mental snapshot and really celebrate. This is a thing that I dreamed of. This is a thing that was not a reality for a long time. And now it is a reality. and to pause and celebrate. And I do this whenever I do a writing training too. I ask people to start with their wins, because it's so easy to let the progress and anything positive just pass us by. As you were saying, we're like, okay, yes, but I expected you to do that. I mean, obviously, versus any little hiccup, any setback, any obstacle, any place where we feel like I could have done better, we perseverate on it. So yeah, taking those snapshot wins. And I know you're having some moments with the band right now that are like, if you of 2 years ago would, see this snapshot of what you're doing, be like, oh my goodness, fast forward me to that
Yeah.
future.
Yeah, we're having doors open in some of the radio stations here, and we're going to to give interviews on the radio. And yeah, this is something that I would never expect in even a year ago. I was just checking like the numbers, right? And you talked about contrast, how that is so helpful as well for us to see the progress and see the different parts of the cycle as well, and even to be grateful for the parts where we are having the thing that we expected to be the whole cycle like that, right? And I was checking the numbers from a year ago, and like we had 100 something. It wasn't 200 yet. It was almost 190 something followers on Instagram. And one, I think it was one song released by this time last year. That's because we started pretty early, but that's what I had. And now we're 10 songs in, and uh 100 no 1,200, almost 1,300 followers, people who are actually excited to hear our songs. And this was 1 year. We have a radio stations that are playing our songs and inviting us in. the, I can only think of what's possible for the next year and the next year, and probably when we get to that, um, I will think. I was thinking very small.
Yeah.
Because yeah, we never know where we can get. We need to live the day by day in the rhythm of day by day, and have the vision for the future, but not let that vision makes us feel like we should be moving faster than
Mm,
our rhythm allows.
yeah. And the magic comes from looking at the stats, being able to zoom out and take that snapshot. And people who work in data know this, right? People who do scientific research know this, that you're going to get lost in all the little data points and dots, right? It's like, oh, this all this little cluster. And when you're in the cluster, you're like, I can't see what's going on. What's the trend? And then you zoom back and you look at the trend and you're like, oh, this is the correlation. More of this creates more of this, or more of this creates less of that, whatever you're measuring. And I think that's a really beautiful reminder. And whether it's like the snapshot game, I'm doing it just qualitatively. I'm not even adding any data to it. But whether it's qualitatively or quantitatively, like looking at the growth and the number of songs, the number of followers, the people interacting, the number of opportunities, even if you just recounted the number of live shows you've played in the last year. I mean, all the different ways you guys have gone and made these connections in the community, and the invitations you've had that kind of seem to come out of the blue, right? With 2 weeks notice, very appropriate. There's so much wisdom. We can start to see the rhythm and the waves if we take intentional time and zoom out and look back.
Yeah.
And that's a practice I don't do nearly enough. I've come back to at the end of my week looking at my numbers, and looking at growth and using that as a way to see the rhythms. But it's a newer practice. It's like a newer muscle I'm building. I have to remind myself to do it.
I would even say, like, now listening to what you're saying, like, it's one thing that we don't realize is that pushing through the slower rhythms, it's not just um not exactly working, but it's actually keeping us stuck for longer in those cycles of stuckness. Like, it's unproductive, right? I had moments where I felt like, no, but if I just set a timer and I do this hard thing, which sometimes is what hustle culture even says, like, you just do the hard thing, uh, everything's gonna be easier. And yeah, of course we can just um avoid the things that need to be done. The errands must be paid. The meeting needs to be set. But pushing through a work that we're not prepared to do at that moment because our mind is not in it, our heart is not in it, or whatever it is misaligned, just keeps us stuck in that for longer. When sometimes, if we took the time to take a walk or sunbath or take a nap, I don't know, whatever it is that you need to,
Eat
like,
ice cream in the hammock. That's mine.
yes, yes, it's gonna give you the space. It's just like, you can't uh try to keep, I don't know, cooking when you have uh, all the dirty dishes to clean. Like, you're gonna end up out of space to do the things that you need to do, right? So sometimes we do, it's the same thing. We need to have the cleanup space for our minds as well.
Oh, beautiful. Beautiful. I've been putting that into practice this week. There were 2 days this week where I hit a wall, and it was exactly what you were saying. It wasn't the live meeting with somebody, it wasn't the, it's happening in real time. It's the creative project that needs to get done at some time this week. And I stopped working, went and did something else completely, moved my body, and then came back later in the evening and continued working, and just was like, oh, there you go. Now this is unfolding with ease. Yeah. I like to say, especially with creative things, like, you'll get more done in 30 minutes of flow than in 3 hours of force.
Yes.
Especially because it compounds, right? So the longer I sit with a task but don't actually get it done, the more guilt builds up. Procrastination generates its own energy, and it creates a repeating cycle. It creates this loop. So I kind of don't want to do the thing. And often it's because I really don't have the focus, the attention, the sharpness that I need, the energy that I need. And I try to push through it and I end up procrastinating, and then I don't get the thing done. So then how do I feel about it? More weight. So then when I go to do it again, my brain's like, oh no, not that thing. I have a negative association with that thing. And it keeps adding more and more weight. Oh my gosh. There's this trail that we've hiked twice now, once in the winter and once in the spring. And in the winter, it was all muddy because there had been ice that melted, and the spring was all muddy because it had rained. And there's something about the soil, it's like clay. It's very silty. And it's ridiculous. It's hilarious. It just sticks to your shoes. So then every new step you're taking, your shoes weigh like 10 pounds, and you just keep collecting more mud, and every step you take, and I'm like, this is this is absurd. But that's how I think of procrastination, right? Every attempt, you just getting deeper into the mud and it's creating more weight. So you're better off just calling off the hike.
That's perfect. The perfect analogy. That it just gets harder and harder, um, instead of getting into flow just because you hopped faster into.
Yeah. Oh gosh. You're collecting muck more quickly.
Yeah.
You're collecting more and more muck. Look at how efficient I'm being at collecting more muck.
Ah. How have you experienced the contrast? Because you talked about contrast earlier, and I was thinking, how have you, yeah, how that helped you see the cycles as well and see the value in the cycles.
Yeah. Well, I was mentioning that um part of me wishes I could just be, like there's this certain moment in my wild woman like part of my cycle, or in the spring part of my cycle, where I just have really good focus and things I just feel like I'm um cutting through water with like the perfect swim stroke or something. I just it's so easy. Like I'm moving with the wind instead of against it. And I almost wish it could be like that all the time. But then my realization was if it were like that all the time, I wouldn't know how good it was. And it's not that I can't experience enjoyment without pain. Although that is very deep in my psyche. And it's interesting to see. That's something really big in my family of origin, that like the greatest joy is thinking there's going to be pain, but it's not. Right? Like, oh, we drove through traffic and we finally found a parking space and we thought we were late to the movie, but it turned out the movie is starting late, so we didn't miss it, or whatever it is. Um, but it's that we just get acclimated to things really easily. So for me, the contrast gives me gratitude for when I am in flow. The contrast of when things are really hard, when I feel like I don't have energy, when I feel like, oh, I'm not myself because I can't be creative right now. That contrast alerts me to how good things are when they're good, and pops me back into gratitude. And I've been using the contrast, even, I think I've mentioned this before to you, but I have the deal with God. And when it's cloudy, when there's no sunshine, the deal is God puts love straight into my heart, puts extra love straight into my heart, because I'm not getting, like, sunshine is really powerful for me. And I just, woo, I feel like the world is a good place. So my deal is like, all right, God, when I go out for my morning gratitude, it's like, hey, it's a cloudy day. You know what that means? Just got to put the gratitude straight into, like, got to put the extra love straight into my heart. And even that as a contrast, I'm finding really helpful. And with it being so hot, I'm not sleeping well. And so I'm waking up in the morning and I'm tired and I'm grouchy, and I'm using the grouchiness as the reminder to shift. Like, if I were kind of just feeling okay, I'd probably go through the rest of the day like, just kind of feeling okay. But because I'm feeling below, like if this is the neutral line, because I'm feeling below the neutral line, I'm aware of the discomfort. So I make an intentional rise in my energy by asking. I'm like, God, I'm tired. You, like, help me out here. Give me some love. And that act of asking, whew, fills me up. So the contrast for me is super helpful, um, to, it's like pushing off the bottom, right? To be able to rise up more. Whereas if I'm just kind of feeling neutral, I might forget to launch myself into a more energetic place.
I love that because it's so easy to move through many days in a normal neutral state, but like not really present. But that's something that contrast gives us as well. It's that ability to see, oh yeah, this is below what i I can't, it's not because I think what I wanted to say is that yes, we can have cycles, but the way we deal with the cycles can be different. And if the contrast allows us to pop back into presence and feel what we need to feel and see what we need to see, and recognize where we need rest or where we need to move our energy, because there's a lot of emotional baggage coming up as well, not just the mental cloudness, or that our body needs some uh, some attention, whatever it is, then it's serving its purpose as well.
Yeah. Yeah. I also experience contrast by okay, so I notice that when I start to feel really blah, it'll be because I haven't experienced really juicy, uncomfortable pain emotionally in a while. Like I've just been numb, and that something that will be really cathartic and healthy and beautiful is letting myself feel whatever uncomfortable feelings I've been numbing to. So I like to do crying yoga where it's like, I'm going to cry and I'm going to like, how much can I cry? Not forcing it, but just, can I sob even more? Can I open up even more? And, if I don't supply those moments for myself, the universe will supply them for me. The last episode we recorded, we had a conversation about like these assumptions we make in our identity, and like, oh, please don't let anybody view me as, these things we're terrified of being seen as. And I had this experience in the world the day after where somebody saw me as, like my number one, please God, don't let anybody ever think of me as this. And I had an experience, and
Oh, perfect.
it was so upsetting in the most beautiful way. And I cried, and I ended up doing a workout, and I sweated, and I just, I got so in touch with my emotions, with my body, with what I was feeling. I let the sobs come, and not coincidentally, then ended up like 2 days later doing really powerful writing, like a lot of creating, got into a flow, got into a zone where I was like, oh, my heart is just coming out onto my computer. And so that contrast for me is key to go through, not just to have mentally to go like, oh, wow, well, like, think of how crap I felt last week and now I feel really good. And so now I know I feel good. It's not just for a mental side by side before and after picture. Going through the contrast, I know, like, I will watch the sad movie, I will listen to the sad album. I used to have crying parties. I used to put on this one Gillian Welch album and just cry through the whole thing. Um, because I know I need to experience the full wave of emotions in
Yeah.
order to feel fully myself and to really be participating.
I love that you brought that, because we talked about feeling ourselves or not feeling ourselves sometimes as well. And I feel like some of the times where I felt the most myself were in times where I was crying a lot and grieving a lot, because all the and probably that's the assumption that I'm making, but probably because all the shoulds are removed in those moments. Like I have no expectations of how I have to be or what I have to do or what it needs to be in those moments. It's just like this is purely how I'm feeling in the moment.
I love it. I love the
And
double meaning of I'm feeling myself. Like I'm feeling myself, but also I'm feeling myself.
yeah. And the moments where I felt the least myself weren't even the moments where I haven't accomplished the whole thing that I expected to accomplish, but in the moments where I felt numb for everything that was happening in life.
Yeah. It's I
Disconnection.
yeah. Yep. It's the numbness. It's the numbness that's the disconnection. That's the uh for me the least helpful thing.
Yeah.
The troughs and the peaks, bring them on.
Yeah.
Beautiful. So what's your big insight from this conversation?
Actually, the big insight that was just coming to me was that even though I haven't been having the big lows lately, uh, I feel like just making some time to feel the feels of all the things that are still underneath the surface, because we don't have to, there are cycles, but we don't have to wait to pile up, right? We can do a session of crying yoga, we can do a session of like really connecting with what's underneath, so that we don't wait until the next big wave comes.
Yes. Yes. And that gives us um more say in the cycle.
Yeah.
And less of a feeling of oh gosh, I'm just the waves keep hitting me and I can't we
Yeah.
can kind of body surf along with them. That's
I,
really beautiful.
I believe we sometimes can handle the and just push through a lot of the in between times when there's not enough contrast to make us like stop and feel like, oh yeah, I need to do something about it. And we can just be slowing down, having a little bit more of a hard time to do the things that we are doing, but we're still doing. It's working. It's going until we hit a big wave and crash, and then we're going to do something about it. But if for any reason we feel like, oh yeah, it's a little bit harder today than it was yesterday, it's a little bit I'm procrastinating a little bit more than I should, maybe it's time to just stop and take a look at how our mind is, our emotions are, what our body needs before continuing. Yeah, I think that's my big insight.
I love it. Yeah, I'm gonna go with that as well. I can create contrast. That feels like a reminder um, to have to have for myself. Like, how am I creating contrast and going deeper? And maybe this is just the grand challenge of humanity in 2024 is how can we get beyond the numb?
Yeah, yeah. And just like you were talking about the sun, we haven't had a sunny day in like a week in here.
Yeah.
And apparently we're only going to have sun Tuesday, so there's a couple more days to go. That for me, even if I'm having a good day, it's enough for me to feel like, oh yeah, I can not even the sun wanted to come to this day. I can slow down a little bit.
Oh, I love it. Oh my gosh. If even the sun is like, oh, I'm sorry, I can't make it, then oh, that's brilliant. That's brilliant. Well, so I think my insight and my inciting action are one and the same, just to create contrast.
Yeah,
How
very
I
cool.
can create contrast to step back into feeling alive. That's really I keep having the song lyric pop up in my head. It's I don't know if it's all of White Sun or if it's just Guru Joss and oh gosh, what's the name of the other artist? But they did a lot of like pair
Club.
ups, collaborations. Yeah. But the
No
lyric
one.
is maybe the only way out is through. Um the only way out is in. Yeah.
Yeah.
So just going deeper in, whether it's to the suffering or to,
Yes.
because I mean, that's the other thing I was thinking in this movie is a conversation for another time, but I'm starting to question that one assumption that we make, which is we all want to avoid suffering. Like, do we?
Do we? Oh, maybe that's the next episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So stay tuned. We'll examine that assumption. We'll examine even the assumptions we said were the only assumptions we were going to make.
Yes. Good point. Good point. Especially when you already mentioned like that the pain, expecting the pain and not getting it's a big uh joy per se.
Yeah. I
And
swear this was how I was taught happiness worked when I was growing up. This would be like my parents would pretend something disastrous had happened and then say, "Oh no, it didn't." And that was supposed to be like the greatest way to give other people joy.
it's another way to see like that at least not it wasn't something worse that happened.
I
Like,
guess so.
yeah.
I guess so. I think it's also around um limiting your own desires.
Yeah.
Like what's the best thing that's possible for me?
Mm.
There's a little bit of stickiness there around like you couldn't hope for more. Like the best thing you could hope for is you thought, you know, you thought you got fired, but it turns out no, they were throwing you a surprise party. Yeah. So,
Yeah.
but let's come back to that assumption. So,
Let's come back.
yeah, love to hear from everybody. What's your take on rhythms, cycles, being in grief, seeing that as a cycle, and join us for questioning the assumption of whether we all really do want to avoid suffering.
Interesting conversation. Until next time, take
Until
care
next time.
and create some contrast.